Wow, welcome everyone. I have to say, I love the energy of your group. Everyone is so excited and pumped to be here, and I want to just wrap you up and bring it back to Chicago, because keep it spreading. It's awesome, awesome. Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak here. This is a really fantastic opportunity. I know it's a big day for so many of you. I can't believe how many graduates. This table is full of certificates. This is amazing. So what a great group you've got. And I do love talking. I love words. I love writing. I love conversations. I would play with my Barbies for days and days and days, having these long, involved, complicated, dramatic relationships. And then I found, soap operas in high school. And just the whole idea of how we communicate, how we really grow through conversation completely fascinates me. So thank you for the intro. A little bit about, I have worked in staffing and human resources for 15 years. I spent the majority of my professional career in Colorado. And when I was there, I was very involved with some recruiting organizations. So it's kind of my street cred. But what I'm passionate about is advising people to make intentional career decisions, whether that's what am I doing with my job or how do I approach my boss for this situation. Whatever it is, I love to help people navigate that. And yes, I'm actually a fiction writer. So I've published a book, a novel, because my personal career path, I wanted to be Judy Blume when I grew up. I didn't quite make it there, but it's still a deep passion of mine. So to dive into today, what's in the queue, because I love fancy words, we're going to talk a lot about passive language and this concept I developed called the boldness barometer. One of my favorite things to coach on is backstory and oversharing. We're going to talk about a bunch of other communication pitfalls and some power tips for your career. So I'm going to move through the slides at a semi-quick pace, and we're going to save Q&A for the end. So if any of this brings up conversation or questions, we can take care of that when we wrap up. So first, let's talk about passive language. So I love this picture so much because this is a stock photo that looks exactly like what my daughter looked like at 4 years old. And if any of you are parents in the room, you've probably heard this. Sounds very familiar. Mommy, looking up at the cookies. Can I have a cookie? I wish I could have a cookie. Not can I have a cookie. I wish I could have a cookie. And you just kind of cringe. You're like, and that whiny, passive way of asking for something would just rub me the wrong way, right? And you're just like, nah, can't have a cookie. And so at one point, my coaching hat went on, and I said, this is a teaching moment. So guess what? New rules in the house. If you say, Mommy, can I have a cookie? With confidence in an assertive tone, you will get an adult answer. The adult answer might be no, you can't have a cookie. It's too close to dinner. Or it might be, yeah, it's a great time to have a cookie. Have at it. You ask me with the whine ask, and it's no. And it will continue to be no. And so a lot of us don't get taught that at a young age, and that grows up. And that turns into the 35-year-old who's saying, I wish I could get promoted. We can wish all we want, but we have to ask. And we have to have the confidence to ask. So I give a talk called Be Bold, Not Bossy. And I had a hard time deciding which talk to bring today, but I really love the communication talk, so I'm bringing this. But this is the concept from my other talk that does tie in together, because I always talk on communication. But I like to introduce this concept that I came up with. So on one end, we have meek, shy, timid, disengaged, disinterested. So when you're low on the boldness barometer in a meeting, I don't know if you are completely clueless as to what's going on or too shy to talk. So I'm going to make up my own decision about that and about your behavior. And over time, that becomes your reputation. And when it comes time for we need somebody to go open up our office in London on the company dime for 2 years, your name doesn't come up because I've made a decision about you based on your lack of engagement. Okay? On the other end, we have all the B words. Bossy, brash, brazen, yeah, bad one. We won't say that one. I don't know why they're all B's. Anyone have a clue? I don't know. They're all B's. And so sometimes on that end, if I just talk louder, if I just get in your face, then you'll listen, right? That doesn't work either. So I like to encourage people that the middle is respectful, it's tact, it's strong, it's women honoring their femininity without being a bully and without being super shy and timid. So it's finding this balance, and that's a lot of what goes into what I'm talking about, and we want to find that middle ground. So passive puts us a little too far on the low end. So what does low boldness communication habits look like? And I have some handouts on the table that I'll encourage you to take with you, post it in your cube, share it with friends, because what I like to show people is that what I speak about, you can use this afternoon at work, when you go out to a meeting. This is tangible, concrete stuff that can start to change the relationships you have and the outcomes at work, at home. I just called. Just is one of the laziest, overused, unnecessary words in the English language. There's a fabulous article that I read once, and I won't quote it entirely, but it talks about just being a permission word. It's a shy warm-up to a request to say, I need something from you, but I don't have the confidence to ask for it. Gmail made a plugin that will actually highlight just in your emails. If you go back, if you take nothing else out, and just start editing this word out of your emails today, watch the tone before and after, and you'll start to get a sense of how people respond to you when you don't use these qualifiers that are unnecessary and that kind of tease out a little bit of lack of confidence is what they do. So I teach on this stuff. I lead groups. I did a Control F search on the second novel I'm working on for the word just, because somebody said, I think you have a lot of justs in your book. Not me. There were 246. Went through, read every single sentence. Does that word need to be there? You know how many it needed to be in? About 5 or 10. Do you mind if there are times where it's appropriate to ask for permission? There are times when we go overboard and we're constantly asking for permission when people are waiting for something from us. Sorry. Sorry is another one of those ones that's just such a crutch, and it happens a lot for women, happens for all genders, but there was this fabulous Google Pantene and sorry. And there was a commercial that came out about 5 years ago really highlighting this concept where they have all these different scenarios where a woman will walk in her boss's office and say, sorry, got a minute? And then she's at home and she's handing the baby over to her husband and she's got her suit on, sorry, and just sorry, in all these different stages of life and work. And then the music amps up and everything's getting exciting, and then they redo every sequence and they take out the word sorry. So then it looks like, hey, got a second? So it's the same thing. But the sorry is an apology that's not needed. You really screw up, say you're sorry. If you just need to ask your boss a question, is that a sorry? It was nothing. Don't pay attention to me. When we shrug off a compliment, it's actually rude. We're actually shoving it back in their face and saying, don't give me that present. I can't accept it. But what we could say is, wow, thank you so much for acknowledging that. We worked really hard on it, and I appreciate you noticing. Whole different power. The ending statements with a question, the little uptick. Again, I don't need to describe that. I think everyone knows what that is. So we somehow have been taught that passive is polite. That's what nice people do. But really, it's actually kind of manipulative. It's where passive-aggressive comes from. It's guilt-inducing. What it does is it suggests a lack of power, and it does it in a really manipulative way. So what passive does convey is that I don't have the courage to ask for what I want. And the ripple effect of that in the workplace means we're not worthy of leadership material. So the people that come in to their cube early and get their heads down and work really, really hard and are quiet and never really ever put themselves out there are frustrated and mad when they're looked over for interesting projects and opportunities. But we've got to engage and we've got to put ourselves out there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do that in a little while. So a couple of examples of the difference between passive and assertive look like this. You're better at this than me. I never know what I'm doing. You do this really well. So we want to compliment and not self-deprecate. This is one of my biggest pet peeves. I think we should do something different, but whatever, I'm sure you're right. I don't know, anyone feel any guilt in that? Can we look at this from a different angle before making a decision? I wish I could be included. I wish I could have a cookie. I don't know, is there a way I could be included? I'd love to go on that business trip, but I'm sure I wouldn't be asked. That was a direct quote from one of my clients. And then my clicker. Would it be possible for me to join on that business trip? So with the passive, we hear this victimhood tone. It's an assumption of no before even asking. Why bother? I'm sure it's going to be no. And then here, this is the confident. It's the courage to hear the word no. That's really all it is. I have a fun story I like to share. At, 26, 27, I was doing some work. I was in human resources. We were opening up our Europe office, and I was working quite closely with the EMEA director, doing some staffing, and he said, wouldn't it be great if you could come over and we could do some recruiting together? I'd never been to Europe, and I'm like, oh yeah, that would be really amazing. And he's like, let's make it happen. So I went to my boss, and I said, hey, can I go over and help recruit? And she said, I wish I could send you, I don't have a budget. But I realized I was doing all the hiring for sales. Sales has money. So I marched my 26-year-old self into the VP of sales office and said, I want to go to Europe and I want your department to pay for it. And he's like, oh yeah, do you? And he's laughing. He's like, don't you have Skype or Zoom or something? Zoom didn't exist back then, Skype. And I said, yeah, we're doing that, but it's better to be there. And he was kind of hemming and hawing. And I said, you know what? I hire all your salespeople, and your top performers get to go to President's Club. Do you guys know that concept? Yeah. And that's like in Hawaii or Bermuda or someplace amazing. I said, I don't get a President's Club. I said, this is my President's Club. And he's like, ha, 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 ha. And he said, go get your ticket. And so my very first trip to Europe was on the company dime. So what was the danger of going in there and asking? I would have gotten laughed out the door and told to go on Skype, which we were already doing, right? But the confidence to walk in there, not only did I get to go to Europe for free on the company dime, my very first time to Europe, but how did he view me now as this 20-something who had the courage to walk in and ask for something? My street cred in that organization and in the C-suite just went suddenly I was on the radar, right? So breaking the passive habit. First, edit your emails. Look for sorry, just, all that cushy words that we don't need. See what happens after a week of editing all that, if your response rate is different. I was working with a project manager who said, I did all this like you said. People are answering my emails. They never did that before. And I said, yeah, it's kind of amazing, isn't it? Find an accountability partner. You're meeting this afternoon. If any of you work together, say, watch me, and report back to me afterwards and let me know, what was I doing and how could I do things differently? Speak up. Have the courage to hear no. But don't assume your ideas aren't of value, because they are. Every idea is of value. I love to tell a story, and I won't go into great detail because we're on a time. See, I get caught in stories. That's what happens. I just want to keep going. I was at a staffing agency, and we were celebrating a big anniversary, and they wanted to do a big event. And I was starting to feel like this was going to be a big waste of money, and no one was going to show. So long story short, I raised my hand. I expressed that. Sure enough, half the people in the room felt the same way. Everybody's waiting for someone else to speak up, right? But the first person who speaks up, they get the social credit in the organization for having the ideas. So speak up. Backstory and oversharing. Blah, blah, blah. We overshare, this is a good concept to take slowly, to build up our confidence to justify our ask. When we're nervous, we get sidetracked into all of the backstory and the justifications to say, I need this from you. And we start with the why. Or we don't get to the ask, we start with all the buildup. So we minimize our power, and again, same concept, expose our lack of confidence when we do this. And ultimately, we completely drown our message in minutia. So coming from my fiction writing, I'm going to kind of give you an analogy. Do you like the book that says the trees were green and the lake was blue and the house looked like this, and 60 pages later you're like, and why do I care? What is happening? Why am I paying attention to any of this? Are these clues? Are these details? What do I need to know? Or do you like the book that says, and the car stopped at the edge of the cliff right before the wheels went over the rim, and they looked in their crevasse, and blah, blah, you know. You can just feel the energy, and you're like, oh, what's happening? Oh my gosh, I can't put this book down. What do you mean I have to make dinner? I've got to read the next page, you know? So when you have a high-stakes conversation and you need something from someone, tell them at the beginning, I want to talk about X, and give a little bit of backstory. But when you take this long, long story, and then at the end of it is an ask, they've already kind of been wondering, well, what the heck of all of this matters, and do I need to keep track of? So start with, we need to talk about the fact that I'm underpaid, that I need a promotion, that I need whatever it is. I've got some data, I've got some stuff to bring that we can talk through about this. You know, then you can kind of go into the backstory. But I was coaching a woman once who said, you know, I figured it out. I'm underpaid. I know, you know, this is going to sound familiar. If they had to replace me, they would need 2 people, and they would need to pay X number more because all of my institutional knowledge, I've been here so long and I've grown. And so I'm going to go to my boss and tell him that I need a raise because my kid needs braces. And I said, you're not doing that. No. I don't care if you want to get an Audi. I don't care if you want to blow it on an exotic trip with your family. Why you need the money isn't the justification for why you deserve a raise, right? Just because you have something that, you know, but what she was doing, which a lot of people do, is saying, it's not for me. It's for someone else. Because I'm in charge of someone else. I would never do it if it was just me, right? And those emotional pleas don't work. They don't get us what we need, and they certainly don't give us respect. So be clear on your conversation outcomes and plan ahead for these critical conversations. Think about how you're going to enter it. Practice, but don't practice to the point of I need to This is the other thing we do is we over-prepare, and we need to have an answer to every single possible outcome. What if they say this? What if they say that? We also have to be able to say, like, that's really great. I hadn't thought of that. I'll need to do some research and get back to you on that. You bring up a good point. It's okay. So the oversharing is really, when you go into these conversations, need to know. What do they need to know of the story to answer your question? And what's just backstory? And you can invite it and say, would you like to hear more? Would you like to know how I came to this? And maybe they say yes, and maybe they don't care. Maybe they don't need it. So we have to build up the courage to share, but not share the buildup. So some other communication pitfalls I like to bring up. Complaining to a third party instead of approaching someone directly. This starts in about second grade, and it never stops. I just put it up there as like, remember, this isn't great. Not that I ever do that, but good reminders. Assumptions. I really love to talk about assumptions, and I'll get to that in a second. But in the absence of information, we invent. We invent all kinds of things. Over-preparing for all outcomes, which I just briefly chatted about. What we've got to do is we've got to let go of their reaction. Whoops. And be comfortable winging it. And being comfortable telling them in the moment, I don't know, you brought up something I hadn't thought of, and you're right. And be humble. And tell them that was great that you came up with that idea, and I'll need to get back to you on that. So with assumptions, I ask this of my clients all the time. What do I know to be true? What do I believe to be true? People hold back from applying for jobs, applying for promotions, asking for things, because they've just created a whole story in their head about how that's never going to happen and why. And so I love to ask somebody when they tell me they can't do something, I'll say, well, do you know that to be true, or do you believe that to be true? And then they go, huh. So it's a good thing to start asking yourself when you get to this place of assumption. But this is a flow that I grabbed from a book called Fierce Conversations. There are 3 authors, and the first one I think is Douglas Stone. So when we look at assumptions, what we want to do is we want to break down what did the person actually say or do? What was the impact of this on me? Based on this impact, what assumption am I making about what the other person intended? And this is the problem with assumptions, is we make assumptions about others' intentions that most of the time are completely false. And then we act on that assumption and continue to make our own decisions that create ripple effects because we're too scared to ask what somebody really intended with that. Email is really, really bad with this, right? And I've done that where I've written back, did you intend to convey this kind of message because that's how I read it? Oh gosh, no, right? But if I had not asked that question and I had assumed their intention, oh, we would have been fighting and later maybe figured out, oh, I don't even know why we're fighting, right? So again, nothing I'm sharing is like groundbreaking new stuff. These are good reminders of where we trip up and how our relationships fail, getting back to Susan Scott's quote in my intro, how relationships fail when we aren't mindful and aren't paying attention. So some power tips for your career. Here's another fun one when we're playing with editing. Try taking the word but out of your conversation and see what happens. I want to go out tonight and I have a headache. I don't know why I always use that example. I don't even go out much, but that's always the one that jumps to my mind. It's really fun to start playing and writing and insert and instead of but, and watch how it changes the tone of the email and how but negates everything that you just said and is often not really what you mean. Ask open-ended questions. Just don't walk in with assumptions and come in with really open-ended questions, inviting the opportunity to bring empathy into the conversation, to understand, to look at things differently. That's the best thing we can do. And this one is one of my favorites. Your story never equates to theirs. So there's a fabulous TED Talk on conversations and communications by a woman by the name of Celeste Headley. It's like 10 minutes long. And her book is pretty good too. I recently read it. I think the book is called We Need to Talk. She had this in her talk, and it really, really struck me. So what this is oh, my uncle just got diagnosed with cancer, and it's looking really bad, and he's going to have to get chemo, and I'm talking, and I'm talking, and I'm talking, and I'm very vulnerable, and I'm scared, and I'm opening up to a friend, and my friend responds with, same thing happened to me. My uncle got sick, and then they take over the conversation, and they're talking about their uncle, that then leads into the conversation about their aunt, that then leads into something else, and you're like, did you even hear me? I am completely unheard. Now I'm shutting down, and I don't care about your uncle, and now I'm kind of angry. And it's just, so when we have that urge, because every time someone tells you a story, it triggers a memory, it triggers a connection. It's kind of how we relate to each other. You said this, oh, I did that too. So stop and say, acknowledge them, listen, give them, at the very least, give them a response back before saying, oh, I have something similar, and maybe even ask them if they want to hear. Would you like to hear about, I went through something like that. Would you like to hear about it? Or if you're ever interested, I could share my experiences because I went through something similar. But this is not my stage to steal when you're being, especially when we're being vulnerable to one another, you know? And I see this with friends when they start to talk about their marital problems. You know, if they're confiding in me about issues with their husband, and I turn around and go, oh my God, my husband does the same thing. Like that, no, he doesn't, because it's always a little different. No, sometimes it's the same. Listen to acknowledge, not reply. So it's the same thing. When I hear your story, when you're telling me something, I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say next and jumping in. I'm all there for you, and that's really important. So this is a concept that I was introduced to when I was 12 years old by a guy named Zig Ziglar. Does that name ring a bell with anyone in the audience? Yeah. Good old Zig. What a name. I don't even know. Is that his real name, or did he? I don't know if that's a fake name. So Zig Ziglar was like the Tony Robbins, I guess, of his day and age, but a really big 70s, 80s, big communicator coach. And he taught me this. Not he personally, but his teachings. The concept of you message versus I message. And then in college, I was involved in this Residence Hall Association, and I gave a talk on passive versus assertive language and talked about this, the you message versus the I message in college. And then when I was writing this one day, I was like, dang, if I haven't been doing this my whole life. Like, I didn't even make the connections. So the you message is putting the blame on someone else, right? You didn't make sense versus I'm having a difficult time understanding. Can you explain yourself again? You're making me feel anxious about this project. No, it's I feel anxious. We blame people inappropriately. Why would you do such a thing? How did this happen? You need to take your job more seriously. I get the sense that you're not invested in your current role. Funny story comes to mind as a way I kind of practice this on the home front. We used to have guinea pigs, and my husband built an outdoor enclosure for our guinea pigs. Guinea pigs lived inside, but on nice sunny days, we'd put them out. One morning, I went into the office and went to feed the guinea pigs. Well, Gingerbread wasn't in her cage. I remember Gingerbread was put out in the cage the night before. They had never spent the night overnight outside. I mean, it is protected, so animals aren't going to get there, but I was like, oof. Gingerbread was alive. Brought her back inside. So in a marriage, this is a really great opportunity. There are two ways to address this when my husband woke up in the morning, right? The first one is, you left Gingerbread out overnight, even though nothing happened, right? Or what I chose to do instead was, Gingerbread got left out overnight. His whole face sank. He knew he did it. I didn't have to say, you did this, right? What's the point? He didn't do it intentionally. Why start a fight over an accident that I could have made? But what we do when we're being lazy with our language choices, you did it. And even though he knew he did it, that immediately does one of these, right? It's an attack. So with this side of it, it's very blaming versus curiosity, open. Maybe I misunderstood the situation. Maybe something else happened, right? So now I'd like to talk about the courage to ask. This is my story of going to Europe, right? Asking forces credibility. It gave me street cred in that organization when I said, can I go to Europe? And I spent 7 years in HR doing a lot of talent management, and I saw a lot of people missing opportunities to get promoted, to get really great to really, get the next great thing because they didn't have the courage to go in and ask for what they really wanted. You don't get what you don't ask for. It's really as simple as that. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. This is full of all these like cliche lines, but they really work. And my favorite, Princess Leia. Stay afraid, but do it anyway. What's important is the action. You don't have to wait to be confident. Just do it. And eventually, the confidence will follow. So it's a lot of fake it till you make it, right? So a few more power tips that I'd like to go through. Manage the people above you. This is probably one of the most important things I can teach someone starting out in their career. Carefully watch the way the relationship you have with your manager, the relationship you have with your manager's manager. Make sure that they understand what you're doing, where you're struggling, how you're succeeding, and make sure you understand what keeps them up at night, what they're trying to achieve, and how you can help them on their path to success. So many people take a passive stance in response to, you're the boss, I follow whatever you do. And they wait. And not all managers have the same level of training. They're not always thinking about mentorship. Oftentimes they want to, and they flat out don't have time. And if you don't command the time from them and really ask for what you need, you can get left in the dust. And especially the A players, because a lot of managers end up giving a lot of their time to their poorer performers. And they assume, well, you're doing great, you don't need me, you're fine, right? But we really need to manage that relationship. I made it a point to go out to breakfast with my boss once a month, to build that one-on-one relationship, to make her understand what I was good at, where I needed support, to understand what she needed help with, and how I could grow. And that takes a lot of, sometimes us initiating and managing that rather than waiting for it to someday happen. We need to step up, or taking those emails of praise that you get from around the organization and forwarding it to your boss if you've got the relationship where you can do so, and saying, hey, got some great feedback from our team. You may want to share this with the people above you and let them know how we're doing. Rob in product management was really happy with the way this turned out. So that kind of gets into tooting your own horn, which a lot of people are uncomfortable about. But I'm telling you, if you want to grow in corporate America, you got to get some degree of comfort with it. Toot away. that gets, that didn't sound so good, did it? That gets back to that line between humility and arrogance and finding ways to share that. We also have to have the courage to ask for critical feedback and be willing to act on that. I've talked a lot about contributing and speaking up and creatively managing your career. I've had some crazy jobs, and they've almost always came from me seeing opportunity, creating them, and pitching them. And I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in corporate America to get really cool roles that we just don't think about. One point, I was in a company, it had about 600 employees, and the whole concept of social responsibility was kind of gaining steam, and it was when companies started doing volunteer days and doing a little bit of corporate community support. So I had this great idea that I was going to be community relations manager and recruiting manager for my company. And I would go out to universities and create scholarships for engineering students, and they would become a funnel for our future engineers. And I was going to create this dynamic between the town we were in and our company as this social leader. And I had it all mapped out, and I was going to, because I was going to get promoted out of this idea, I was going to have a recruiter under me who could do all the work that I didn't really want to do anymore, and I was just going to be in charge of it. So I just worked myself, I kind of created a promotion for myself and got myself up to a manager rather than an individual contributor. And I went to my boss, and she thought it was a cool idea and had merit. And I went to her boss, who was the CFO, who said, the CEO will never go for this, forget it. So then guess what happened? In 2 years, we got a new CEO. So I went in and pitched it again, and he's like, this is fabulous. So I got this role. It was really hard to have community relations manager hyphen recruiting manager on a business card, but somehow I fit it all in there. And you know what people in the company said? That's such a cool role. How come I never saw that posted? Yep. Done that a couple times. You want a really cool role in your company? Have it make money or save money for the company, and they're all yours. This one was all about PR, visibility, something cool. Marketing loved it. There's a lot of opportunity to get creative. Now it's time for me to stop talking. Embracing silence. Sometimes not talking is the best thing we can do, right? Sometimes we just need to shut up. Getting back to that concept, I'm going to say it again. Listen to understand, not to answer. Susan Scott was in the intro. She wrote a book called Fierce Conversations. It's probably one of the most important books I've read on conversations. There's a group called Vistage, which is a CEO mastermind group that exists, I think it's worldwide. And she was CEO of it once upon a time. I think that's her background. But as long as you're talking, you're not learning anything you don't already know. So the more we listen and the more we stop talking, the more we learn about other people, about the world, about concepts. So if you're looking for additional reading, she's one I would definitely recommend. So I'm going to go ahead and get to my conclusion slide so we can have time for Q&A as well. In conclusion, passive is not polite. Your backstory just waters down your ask. Test your assumptions with empathy. Be courageous in your communications. Silence can truly be golden. I've got handouts on the table, so be sure to grab one of those before you go. This is my contact information. If anything I've said today has triggered a question, if you'd like, hey, what was that Celeste girl's name again? I want to get her book, anything like that.